G'day everybody, my name's Richard Marver. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you all today. In this brave new world, it's a little bit different the way we're doing things. I'll try and keep this entertaining and yeah, thanks everyone for bearing with me. I'm here to talk to you today about Esrim planning. It's something I do on my day-to-day and basically try and get across what it is we do when we do Esrim planning, how we do it, why we do it, and why we think it's successful, why we think it's being adopted quite widely through the rangelands. And I'm also hoping to show you some of the outcomes, some of the positives and learning moments we've had whilst doing the Esrim program. At the start, I'll say Esrim stands for Ecologically Sustainable Rangelands Management. It's an acronym we've been stuck with since the start, but it has now gained a bit of a reputation, so we're going to forge ahead with it. So I'll move on. So the Esrim program aims to work with land managers to essentially identify and benchmark ecological indicators of the landscape function on their own properties, and from that develop plans that achieve outcomes that are positive for their ecological and potentially production and potentially conservation goals. It's essentially based around a mapping exercise. The mapping exercise is closely based on the old EMU project, Ecosystem Management Understanding, and we have modified that through the years based on feedback and a broadening of the topics that we cover. We essentially focus in on the various ecological aspects of the area in question, the project area or the project that we're planning for. And from those aspects, we can start to nail down the issues and ideas and values that are most important for that property to develop up a plan that will deliver runs on the board, but also be practically implementable. It's based upon published ecological theories. There's a few listed there. As I said, EMU is a strong influencer of this process. So Hugh and Ken Tinley's work and Hugh Pringle's work feature strongly. We have a very strong focus on people, and I think that's been one of the big successes of the process, has been that it's been designed around getting the people who are actually going to be delivering the plan involved from the very start, and making sure that it's their plan and it's their knowledge that we're capturing and it's not being imposed upon them. So from where we started 15 years ago, we are now nearly up to our 100th plan. We've covered an area of approximately 19 million hectares when you add it all up. You see on the map there, we're fairly well distributed around Western Australia. It's a very well-known process in Western Australia. We've worked across multiple land tenure types, and we are now introducing the same process into North Queensland and also the arid lands of South Australia. So a very quick overview of what's involved in an Esrim plan. Essentially, as I said, it's a mapping exercise. We also use on-ground and aerial surveys, often nowadays using an unmanned aerial vehicle or a drone to aerial survey those priority areas that we've identified through the mapping exercise. We then have further mapping and discussions to discuss what we've seen on the ground, what we're observing in general trends in the country, and to start putting some plans out into the future for what we might need to do in terms of infrastructure and other things to move forwards. And all that information then gets summarised into a plan that hopefully lays out the strategies for different areas of the station, lays out the priorities for management, and also puts some costs and timed activities in front of the land manager for them to be able to sink their teeth into and tick off as they move through them. We end up with a large planning document that includes all the context, background, and planning information. And we also extract out of that document the on-ground activities that we've identified as being priorities and put them in a large poster that can be hung on the wall to be looked at easy reference to make sure that things are front of mind for those people that have developed up their plans. So some of the things that we discuss as part of the process. Obviously, we go through the climate trends, both historical and predicted. We also look at the natural resources of the lease or property, so everything from land systems through to surface and subsurface hydrology. We utilise a lot of existing desktop data because there is a lot of information around. We found for a lot of these properties that we can tap into and get a really good handle on things straight away. We also obviously look at the current landscape condition, and in my view, one of the most important things we look at is not just the condition currently, but the condition trend, i.e. where is the property going from and where's it going to. That's extremely important to work out. Are we on a positive trajectory, a stable trajectory, or a declining trajectory? We also look at all aspects of the current and historical land management. So what was the land used for? How is the grazing managed across the lease through time, not only in terms of domestic but also feral grazers, weed management, any erosion issues, so historical works that have been done but current issues that are being observed as well, fire management and fire history, and infrastructure, both historical and current. So from all of this, we can identify the drivers that are giving us or contributing to the observed landscape condition and the management of that area. And from there, we can start to use that information to determine where we are now, where do we want to get to, and how are we going to achieve that through those on-ground activities. So we start with looking at the best land use strategies for an area. Is it domestic cattle grazing or sheep grazing? Is it some other form of land use, conservation, carbon, culture? Or is there something else that we haven't thought of yet that the land manager is particularly interested in trialling? So we look at not only what the land manager is interested in, but also what the landscape is best suited to. We can then work out how each of those land uses will be managed within the property. So we start to nail down into some of the detail of the on-ground management that will occur to achieve those land uses and implement them. And of course, underneath all of that, we're going to be addressing those landscape issues that we've identified through the current situation analysis, such as the erosion control strategies, any weed or feral animal control, as well as broader grazing strategies for conservation as well as production. And often fire management is a particularly important one within spinifex or savanna grassland land systems as well. Within all of this, obviously, one of the biggest things that I find is that the collaboration and engagement have to be there from the start. It's extremely important that land managers are engaged and feel fully comfortable. That's the only way you're going to get honest discussion, and it's the only way that you're going to be able to really nail down into what the priorities are for that land manager. It's especially important to have that collaboration and engagement if you're dealing with multiple land managers, potentially with different management motivations. So one of the successes of this process has been the ability to sit down with an Indigenous group, a pastoral group, and potentially even a conservation group, and actually come up with a plan that's supported by all those individuals and all those groups, despite them having potentially very different ideas about how the country should be managed. Because at the end of the day, we often find there's commonalities in where they want the lands to be and where they want the landscape to be into the future. And we can find those commonalities and drive towards those. They might be done for different reasons, but they're still being driven towards. And that leads to really positive discussions that occur, and also potentially a much more powerful plan that will be supported and implemented by all concerned. So we feel that the Esrim process provides that non-threatening environment. It really feels, and we try to make it feel just like having a discussion. It's very much just a conversation. One of the best compliments you can have after a process is that they didn't realise that they were really delving into as much detail as they thought they were. There's often challenging moments, but we work through those, and we always keep a positive atmosphere and a positive environment as we talk about those challenges. So this is what the plan looks like. I've just put the table of contents here. There's obviously a lot in it. As I said, the document's fairly large, but we do try and put as much detail in because this is often something that's used to demonstrate best management and also to lay out for a a land manager what they plan to do to a bank manager or a grant application or whoever else they may want to show it to. It's often used within corporate agriculture for presenting to boards, etc. And this is the poster that gets extracted out of that document. So as I said, it's a simple one-page snapshot of all the on-ground proposed activities for that lease. So I just thought I'd run through quickly some photos of what we've seen as we travel around, the befores and the afters, and it's particularly focused on the erosion control aspects of what we do and landscape rehabilitation. So obviously we see some really nice things, the things we usually see on the postcards and the websites, but often in reality there's things like this that we see as well, and that is erosion occurring, systemic landscape problems, and loss of function within landscapes. So a big question that I always get asked when we start talking about this sort of stuff is why bother? And I believe that this quote from Robin Zhao from Central Australia sums it up really well. And that is that it really should be seen as core business, not just something that we do because it feels nice, but actually something that should be central to how we operate our businesses on the land. Because if we don't have production and function, we don't have the pasture, we don't have the livestock, we don't have jobs, and therefore we don't have lifestyle. And that's realistically what a lot of us are out here for, is for that lifestyle. And we're trying to prevent that, which is essentially the landscape becoming unplugged, things not functioning, water being wasted, rainfall being wasted, excessive damage caused to the landscape, not only in the area where the rain falls, but also downstream. So some of the techniques that we use, from the very basic, such as scrub packing. This is often used on a very small scale. It's usually done by hand, but can be particularly effective where you've got small areas of erosion. You simply push down scrubs and branches into the erosion gully, flatten out the edges, and allow nature to start to repair itself. You can often see it happening naturally, and we can assist it by simply pushing down trees and logs into creek systems. You may notice in this image a large area of sand being built up around the logs, and further down to the right, very little sand in the creek line. Erosion banks are a little bit more involved. They require surveying, they require the correct construction, but can be particularly effective at blocking off heads of erosion gullies. This is an example from the northern Kimberley, where we have 1,000 mils a year of monsoonal rain. And as you can see, it's been relatively effective at stopping that gully head from further encroaching upslope. And there is now starting to become grass and other things stabilising into that landscape to hopefully prevent that gully from getting worse. You can obviously see the aim of this was not to repair the entire gully, but more so to prevent that gully from creeping further back and becoming worse. Grader banks used on scalded areas, which are essentially bare, non-functioning flats. There's multiple techniques we use on these scalded flats. These grader banks are often quite effective. They're cheap to implement. They don't require surveying, and they do achieve a pretty useful outcome by not only ponding water, but providing niches for weeds and hopefully further on pasture species to start to rehabilitate and introduce that function back into the area. So another technique is the ripping and contour banks. This is an example from the Pilbara in Western Australia, where we ripped a scalded mulga flat, and within 2 years we'd achieved a relatively good outcome of diverse perennial grasses and other productive species coming back onto that scalded area. The pastoralists noted that there had not been a blade of grass growing on that area for a long time. Track erosion, woeboys. We use a number of designs for woeboys. This again is in the northern Kimberley, but essentially repairing a track gully and reverting it back to a and then gully rehab as well. This is on a mine waste rock dump where we actually reshaped the gully into a natural drainage line and stabilised it using rock armour. So tying all that together and overviewing on all of this is the broader landscape function stuff, such as the the grazing management. So we tie that all together into a grazing management plan, looking at rotations, capacities, stocking rates, again, land uses for NRM or drought reserves or conservation, and yeah, try and use maps as much as we can. Fire management's a crucial part of what we do in the spin effect. It's a very powerful management tool for managing spin effects, not only to make it more productive, but also to improve the diversity and diversity of plant and animal species within an area. So again, we use maps and diagrams to try and develop up fire management rotations that lay out for the pastoralist a really nice decision framework on how they can manage fire through a landscape and introduce that mosaic burning pattern that we're all aiming for. We develop infrastructure plans to match the grazing management and fire management plans to make sure that we are going to achieve those and be able to implement them through time. And these are timed out and costed as we develop them. Finally, and most importantly, this is all linked together in a holistic and practical plan that looks at all aspects of the land, and most importantly, or more importantly, the collaboration and conversation that occurs out in the field really make this a powerful process. We have a lot of engaged, challenging, positive, in-depth conversations. I learn a lot every time I go out to a place, but it truly is amazing when you start to see these ideas getting implemented and these paradigms starting to change on how we manage landscapes and look at landscapes. It's where I think really the Esrim process kicks a lot of goals, and why I believe it's so widely been so widely adopted by the industry. Thanks very much for your time, everybody. I'm actually in the arid lands of South Australia at the moment, so I'm not available for questions now, but please feel free to get in touch via email or on my phone, and I'd be happy to talk through anything you've heard today or talk further about the process and what we do. Thank you very much indeed.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Richard, and I hope you're having a great day out there where you are at the moment. Thanks for your presentation.